with the next story in 13 Alabama Ghosts and Jeffrey. But before we get to today's story, I wanted to ask you about the thinking you did from yesterday. Thinking about things that are red. How long a list were you able to come up with? I haven't counted my list up, but I was able to come up with several. And I have some favorites on my list of things that are red. One of them is fever cheeks. I was thinking about my children when they used to get sick and their cheeks would get so red with fever. And then another favorite I had was Rudolph's nose. And a final favorite I had was the hourglass on a black widow. So those were some fun things that I thought of that were red in that time that I did that thinking. Well, let's get to today's story. It's called The Crying Spirit at the Well. In the little Wilcox County village of Furman, very few houses had waterworks during the 1800s. A good well, one that would not go dry during a long drought, was a highly prized possession. But wells, even good ones, presented problems. Turning a heavy windlass over and over, or tugging at a rope to draw up a bucket of water was hard work. Sometimes, especially in summer, there would be wiggle tails swimming around in the bucket of water after it had been drawn up. Then the well had to be treated with salt to kill the wiggle tails, and the drinking water had to be brought from a neighbor's well or spring. And things were always falling into wells: dippers, buckets, knives, sometimes even cats. The worst thing that could happen to a well was for it to go dry. This is what happened at the home of Dr. John H. Purefoy, whose grandfather had been one of the early settlers of Furman, and whose Purefoy descendants live in the same house to this day. Dr. Purefoy had a large well in his backyard, and the well went dry. There had been a parching hot summer with no rain for weeks, and not only this well, but those of several neighbors dried up too. This calamity occurred at a very busy time for Dr. Purefoy. Several of his patients were ill with malaria, and there were one or two babies ready to be born at any minute. So the busy doctor felt that he simply did not have time to cope with the problems of a dry well. He hoped that a heavy rain might replenish his water supply, though he knew such a thing was quite unlikely. To postpone the necessity of having a new well dug, Dr. Purefoy decided that water for use in the house and the kitchen should be brought from a spring near Savage Hill, a mile or so down the sandy road, until the hoped-for rain renewed his well. It seemed a simple solution. The spring produced the finest drinking water in the county, and its owner was quite willing to share his water with his friend the doctor. Dr. Purefoy's servants, however, showed that they were not pleased with this plan. Dr. Purefoy thought that their dissatisfaction stemmed from having to make the inconvenient trips to the spring and back. He did not listen to their complaints closely enough to learn that it was not the trips that disturbed them. They were frightened by tales of the witch who guarded the spring. Even if he had listened, though, Dr. Purefoy would not have been sympathetic. He did not believe in witches. So he was first displeased and then angry when his servants returned again and again from the spring with their buckets empty, damp but empty. According to their stories, their trips were uneventful until they had filled their buckets with water and tried to go under or over the barbed wire fence that surrounded the spring. The witch, they declared, was determined not to permit water to be taken out of the wired-in enclosure. No matter how hard they tried, the servants told Dr. Purefoy the water always spilled when they reached the fence. They were sure that the selfish witch at the spring caused the water to spill, but they could not convince the skeptical doctor of this fact. He tried to shame them for being superstitious, and when they attempted to tell him about the black cat at the spring, the cat with the mean eyes, he would not listen. However, even if he did not believe in the tales about the witch, Dr. Purefoy was convinced that he could not depend on getting water from the spring and would have to have a new well dug in his own backyard. So he summoned a crew of well diggers. "I need a new well, and I need it as soon as you can dig it," Dr. Purefoy told them, and they nodded in agreement. They nodded too when Dr. Purefoy cautioned them to use extreme care in digging the sandy soil. He reminded them that the well might cave in on them and kill them. "As you dig," he told them, "you must build a wooden casing inside the hole to keep the sides from caving in on you." He then showed them how to use the lumber and other materials they would need to build the casing. Before they began to dig, one of the workers cut a slender forked branch from a peach tree to use to find the best place to dig. He held the fork of the wide lightly in each hand and slowly walked around the backyard. Soon the end of the branch began to twitch and jerk toward the ground. He stopped and shouted to the others, "Here's the place! Here's where the water is!" Then he marked the spot, and they began digging. Dr. Purefoy stayed with them until he was satisfied that the men would follow the safety precautions he had outlined. Then he drove off in his buggy to see his patients. The well diggers followed his instructions for a while, but building the protective casing slowed down their progress. And after they had dug down about 10 feet, they quit strengthening the sides with their wooden casing. The work went faster then. They took turns going down into the excavation and shoveling dirt into the empty buckets, which were pulled up by the other workmen at the rim of the well. It was growing late, and they had decided to stop for the day when suddenly, without warning, the well caved in, completely covering the man who had been digging down in its bottom. His companions worked frantically for hours trying to rescue him. Dr. Purefoy reached home shortly after the accident occurred, and he directed the rescue efforts all night. As time passed, though, he knew that even if the body was recovered, the man would not be revived. But his friends did not stop their efforts. They continued digging for days, and occasionally they thought they heard faint cries for help coming from beneath the sand. But the body was never recovered. Some people believed it was sucked away by an underground current. Nobody in Furman ever forgot the tragic death of the well digger, for there appeared two remarkable and persistent reminders about it. In the backyard behind Dr. Purefoy's house, there is a slightly sunken area where the well was being dug. No grass will grow on this round spot, even today. Tenants who lived in a servant's house nearby told of a haint that sat on the bare spot and cried all night long. They said his hot tears burned up the grass that tried to grow there, and that he moaned bitterly as he cried. And even those who had not ventured close enough to see the haint told of having heard the plaintive cry, "Get me out of here, please, please get me out," as they passed the Purefoy yard late at night. They recognized the words as the recurring death cry of the well digger, a ghost who continues to haunt the place where his life came to an untimely and horrible end when he was buried alive in Dr. Purefoy's well. Well, that story had something very interesting in it. Do you remember what the men did to try to find the best place to dig for the well? Well, there are some traditions that believe that there are people who have a special ability to find water. And that ability is called dowsing. And you can get online and research and even see videos and other things that people have published about dowsing and find out what people think that you have to do to be able to do this, to be able to locate water and the best places to dig new wells. Well, I hope you have a good time doing your research, and I'll see you tomorrow for our last story in 13 Alabama Ghosts. Bye-bye.